Welcome back, everyone, to our in-person audience and our online audience. We are now going to hear from our next trailblazer from the field. And before I go to Dallas's introduction, I do just want to acknowledge that we're also joined by Holly Sargent, who's a state representative in Maine. And we're just really pleased to have elected officials among us. So our next trailblazer is Dallas Ducar, and she has many, many hats. So many, in fact, that I confirmed last night they're all current, and they are, in fact, all current. So she is the founding Chief Executive Officer of Trans Health. She is on the faculty, and I'm going to list all these universities. She's on the faculty of Northeastern, University of Virginia School of Medicine, University of Virginia School of Nursing, Columbia University, and the MGH Institute for Health Professionals. She's also a fellow at the American Academy of Nursing, and she's a thought leader in healthcare, particularly in the area of gender-affirming care, as well as a community advocate and a policy advisor. We are very, very fortunate to have her here. Please join me in welcoming Dallas to the stage.
Hello, thank you all for having me. I was born seen as a white cisgender man in this world, as someone who had the utmost privilege. I learned how to talk between worlds, how to say I was one person, but know I was someone else. And it was not as if I always knew. Instead, it was a struggle. I didn't know if I was gay, if I was a sinner, if I was ruined from the get-go. In truth, I was trans. I came out right after 2016's presidential election at the Women's March. I recall feeling alone, misunderstood, feeling separated from my family, all back in Arizona. And one person who helped me remember that I was whole was my Nana. My Nana was the matriarch of our family. And when I came out to my mother, she told me that my Nana would have a heart attack. I spent months hiding in the closet. But Nana wasn't a fool. Nana knew. Eventually, I came home for a conference, and this was right after the 2016 presidential election, after Trump was sworn in. And this time, I decided to present at that conference as the person I knew I was, as a woman. And I only packed dresses. I wasn't going to tell my Nana I was there, though, but she found me at my house beforehand. She barged in without me knowing to the house, went right to the backyard, saw my co-presenters, Melissa, a therapist, Yoshi, a chaplain, which is a great setup for a joke. But they were really great folks to have in a moment like this. And I was in my room, and I was panicking. And Melissa gives me a call on the phone, and she goes, "Dallas, honey, your Nana's here, and she really wants to see you." I panicked. Nana was about to have a heart attack. Step by step, I came out wearing the only clothes I had, dresses, literally coming out right now. And once I was out of my room and on the patio with Nana, Yoshi, and Melissa, I see them all talking. Nana turns around, sees me, and without missing a beat, gives me a big hug and says, "I love you." And then says, "That outfit is a reject. We're going shopping." It was the most affirming message a woman could want from her grandmother: fashion advice and love. After this, she took me to TJ Maxx, which is one of the best places to go because no one is following you around. You can do whatever you want. And when we returned home, my mother and my stepfather were there. Nana had not had a heart attack. Nana ordered them to sit down instead. They were shocked, I was shocked. Nana commanded the scene. And she ordered the most important and kind of strange intervention, a fashion show. She ordered me to walk up and down my own home in front of my parents, and every single time turning to them and clapping, basically forcing them to clap too, showing support for her granddaughter, who she loved. It wasn't easier, but it was easier with Nana. Now, less than 10 years later, I join you on the precipice of the 2024 presidential election that will undoubtedly affect all of us, no matter who wins. This is an election that threatens the ability to have autonomy over our own bodies, whether it's reproductive care, whether it's the ability to create our own families, or receive life-saving, gender-affirming care. But this is also a moment when we're called to reflect on key themes that have shaped our nation: power, perception, representation, and gender. These are pivotal forces molding our political and healthcare realities. Today, we are called to fight against disinformation, hatred, and targeting, causing devastating harm to communities. And we have to bring forth a new vision to resolve these tensions. So what do I see as the vision? It starts with today. I'm going to talk about the political and healthcare landscape, how gender-affirming care can be a model for all of healthcare, and how our organization, Trans Health, has responded to this challenge, and the struggles that we face in creating trans health during this moment in particular, and how we can make voices heard during this environment. We must first recognize the critical implications for healthcare, particularly for gender-affirming care. In recent years, the escalation of disinformation and hate speech ignited during COVID has perilously mingled scientific fact with political bias. During the pandemic, we saw state and federal institutions at times refuting scientific evidence, violence against doctors and nurses, distrust of institutions, and cultural lines being drawn around life-saving care. The troubling trend now casts a shadow over the healthcare rights of all of our communities. Nearly half of our states enforce bans that deny best practice medical care for youth, for trans youth. Nearly half. And many policies increasingly jeopardize the well-being of the LGBTQ community. These policy trends are not isolated, but are part of a broader narrative that affects how gender and healthcare are perceived and politicized. And this is very clearly bodies that are being controlled. We've seen a small minority utilize extreme measures, including bomb threats against children's hospitals, against state legislatures, most recently in Maine. This is not just a healthcare issue. It is a political crisis that mirrors broader societal divides and misperceptions fueled by online trolls. We must not just confront these challenges, but really forge a path ahead, guided by principles of equality, by justice, and an unyielding pursuit of truth. We have to forge a path that listens closely to the real concerns, but that honors the complexity of gender and the integrity of comprehensive care in our ongoing quest to build a more understanding world that better serves people. In Worcester, Massachusetts, we've launched a project to counteract and stand as a bastion. It's called Trans Health, and it's a new nonprofit clinic born out of the need to create a space where trans people can be served, a place where everyone can feel that they belong and they're provided good gender-affirming care. Building trans health amidst a global pandemic and a contentious political climate, to say the least, has been a challenge. But it directly responded to an urgent and clear need. The decision was made in an environment where disinformation was rampant and fundamental human rights have been under siege. Each patient receives up to an hour with us, far above industry standards, allowing the precious time for us to really get to know our patients and vice versa. This approach ensures that we address the immediate medical needs, but also embrace overall well-being, crafting a care experience that's nurturing, that's comprehensive. And that's because affirming care, it epitomizes the pinnacle of individualized, evidence-based healthcare, but also embodies principles of American liberty, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, things that we all want. Affirming care is an attempt for a provider and a patient to better know each other, and at times our family. And it takes the time not to address one specific problem, but to understand your values, your identity, who you want to be as a person. This model, supported by every major healthcare organization, represents or respects individual choices and is guided by the best scientific evidence available, representing a stark contrast to the politically motivated attacks it faces. After 3 years at Trans Health, I serve alongside a team of over 50 people, most of whom also identify as trans or gender diverse. We provide wraparound primary care, mental health services, psychiatry, psychotherapy, and growing community health programs designed to meet the patient where they are. We embed research, education, advocacy in all the work we do. We have a community room with bright windows, with a large community closet for those who are transitioning, for those who need to feel affirmed or need to go for that job interview. A community library, which probably hosts every banned book in Florida. We've hosted workout classes, yoga groups, groups for kids to create their own theatrical plays. We've even had farm share groups. We work to expand service offerings that are completely wraparound regardless of what insurance will pay for. The model has led to really remarkable outcomes. Our patients feel known, heard, understood. Almost all of those at Trans Health say that Trans Health is a place where they can be themselves as patients. They form connections during clinical visits through our community programs and mental health support. And it's not just our patients who benefit, our clinicians. In an industry that's plagued by burnout and high suicide rates, our staff retention rates are exceptional. Establishing the country's first and independent gender-affirming healthcare center where an entire organization, an entire budget is dedicated to this is no small feat. We built Trans Health at a time when security was on everyone's minds. From the first days, we grappled with fears of mass shootings, bomb threats, and violence at our door. As a small startup, we took extreme precautionary measures to prevent undue harm where no one would want to hurt us, removing our location from any public areas and websites, installing locks in all our doors, taking time to consider cameras in a place where people need complete privacy to avoid being outed. And this took a toll on our staff. Many struggled with the fear of going to work at times, constantly practicing defensive medicine, being worried that we had infiltrators in our own space at times who were not who they said they were. While Trans Health might sound idyllic, the stress for the past couple years caused on all of us cannot be understated. And still, our team members have advocated daily for patients and clients in the clinic, in the community. Our healthcare does not just operate only in this context, though. We are living amidst a loneliness epidemic where isolation translates to public health crises. This is profoundly amplified in the trans community, where people who've been discriminated against are unable to trust their own providers, and many people show up at Trans Health with 10 to 20 years of not receiving health care just to show up with urgent or emergent needs. Instead, we need places to connect. We need places to trust others. We need places to be known. I believe it's through community-based healthcare systems that we can create third spaces to gather and be, and not just focus on illness, but wellness, not just provide good healthcare, but spaces for belonging in society. Our battles are not just about gender or politics, they are about a fundamental lack of understanding and empathy. We live in a society that's quick to divide us by identity, whether it's gender identity, reproductive freedom, or other experiences with gender. But at its core, the issue is disconnection from each other, our susceptibility to manipulation by powerful interests that distract us from larger crises like climate change or like economic inequality. There are larger forces at work that seek to divide us based on artificially constructed lines rather than unify against the more significant forces of our time. And what we need right now, I believe, is hope, and it's grit. It's hope to see that the future can be different, and it's grit to get through those times when you're weathering the storm. For me, Trans Health is one symbol of hope. We are an attempt to show in bricks and mortar what good care can be. We have tried to build a place where patients and staff can be themselves, a place where one's identity doesn't have to matter and one can just be real. But while we know that this is the right model, we also know we need a lot more of this type of care, and we know that we need this care to be able to scale. I believe we have to integrate these models of care for the whole person into all clinical environments. It's about moving from treatment to prevention, from isolation to community, and doing what we do at Trans Health and creating centers where patients actually want to receive care, but actually show up and just even hang out and be with each other. We need to advocate for healthcare policies that support community value-based care, care where people can receive robust primary care, mental health care, and wraparound models, where we can create a place where people can truly be seen. And I believe that models like this can vastly improve health outcomes, but also strengthen our democracy by rebuilding the social fabric of our communities and our health. And it won't be easy. But we did this not because the fight ahead was easy, but because we knew it would be hard. As we approach these elections, we have to use our voices, we have to use our votes to advocate for a world where healthcare is free from political interference, where gender is understood in its complexity, and where every individual can access the care that they need and they deserve without discrimination or violence. We need to start having conversations with those who do not always agree, to begin to reflect on our own values and how our own values can be aligned with those who we might disagree with. In the end, it's about saddling up with that diner and not being afraid to strike up a conversation, to engage with those who otherwise may not know someone who is different from them. Because at the end of the day, we all seek freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So as you leave here today, I really want you to ask, what is one thing that you can do to bridge these divides? One way you can use your voice to meaningfully engage with someone, to start that conversation, to fight against disinformation, to build understanding. I want to ask you to start by envisioning what that world looks like and join me hand in hand to be able to make that happen. That is the vision that motivates me. This is why I do what I do. I do this to give everyone that sense of community that my Nana gave me. And I believe even in a fractured world, we can find our way back to each other, starting with one conversation at a time. Thank you.
Let's give Dallas one more round of applause. Just really want to thank you for your courage and your vulnerability and your leadership. And I'm trying to get fashion advice from your Nana. But now we're going to turn to our second panel of the day, which is focused on, now you're elected, you're in office, how do you actually get your voice heard? And this panel will be moderated by Erica Chenoweth, who studies political violence and its alternatives. They serve, and like Dallas, have many titles, as the Academic Dean for Faculty Engagement, the Frank Stanton Professor of the First Amendment at the Kennedy School here at Harvard, the Faculty Dean at Forsheimer House at Harvard College, and the Susan S. and Kenneth L. Wallach Professor at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute. Can I please invite Erica and our panelists, Magda, Yulín, and Karyn, to join us on stage? Thank you.
Good morning. So this panel is called How to Make Your Voice Heard. And in my opening framing, I'd like to just add a small qualification to that, which is how to make your voice heard right now, in the moment that we're in the moment that Dallas just laid out for us and that some of our earlier panelists were also alluding to. And in doing so, I want to lay out what I think is an interesting paradox in our time, at least here in the United States, but is also reverberating in places all around the world. So by many measures, in the United States right now, we have a more diverse and engaged polity than we've ever had in this country. You've already heard from Dean Brown-Nagin and from Jennifer and others the many enumerated ways in which we've had record-breaking representation of women in elected office and of diverse representation beyond just gender representation as well. I'll also point out that many political scientists have paid lots of attention to the fact that we've got higher voter participation, that is turnout, including higher rates of participation by young people, high turnout in midterm elections than in generations. Women and Black women in particular are among the most reliable voters in our electorate today. And we also have a deeply mobilized civil society above and beyond elections, with record-level participation in protests and counter-protest on basically any issue of contemporary salience today. I run something called the Crowd Counting Consortium with my colleagues Jeremy Pressman and Jay Ohlfelder. And in 2017, we counted every women's march that was held in the United States and tallied the number of participants that were reported to have been there. On conservative estimates, we can still say it was the largest single-day demonstration in US history. And since 2017, we've seen that record broken over and over again, at least 7 more times. So we have a deeply engaged electorate, a deeply engaged civil society, and those levels of deep engagement are represented across partisanship and many other measures. Yet at the same time as we have this deeply engaged civil society and electorate, we also have a widespread sense among our polity that the country is at stalemate at best and deeply divided at worst on numerous basic issues, from climate change, abortion, healthcare more broadly, trans rights, the economy, foreign policy, and education, to even just how we basically run our elections and count the ballots. In many polls, people report that they feel that the country is headed in the wrong direction, and that again is true regardless of partisanship. So political scientists have observed a few key factors that help us to understand why such deep engagement can coexist with such high levels of political despair. First is the issue that has been alluded to a few times already, this issue of affective polarization. The idea that there's deep distrust of and even contempt for perceived out-groups or people who are outside one's own partisan identity group. The second related issue is a high level of in-group policing within one's own identity group. So we have high levels of polarization, distance between perceived out-groups, and then kind of ideological cohesion that's almost coercive within the two different opposing poles. This is related to the fact that this deeply engaged civil society is not a particularly bridged civil society. So there's sort of 2 different types of civil society. There's bridging civil society, which is where people come together across difference and do common projects like, cleaning up the town park or engaging in sports. We have more of what you might call bonded civil society, where people get together with those with whom they have some shared affinity, and they work on their own demands and their own agendas together. So we've got a lot more of the latter than the former, which also reinforces these issues of polarization and the sense of contempt and distrust of the other. The third issue is that we have declining public trust in established institutions of all kinds, from the news media to the church, to Congress, to institutions of higher education, to electoral processes themselves. The fourth issue that many people have opined about and worry about is the cacophony of voices, including many sharing disinformation or misinformation that batter our attention span, increasingly through social media, which we volunteer for in our pockets on a daily basis. And then the fifth issue is this sort of overall sense that there's a broad-based cultural backlash against perceived progress, particularly around progressive issues on gender, race, and LGBTQ rights. So I think those key questions frame the discussion for our panel today, which is the question of not just how you make your voice heard once you're elected, but how do you kind of make that voice count through this cacophony of pressures in a way that can transcend differences, begin to rebuild trust in the institutions that our society relies on to deliver, and build power to have even greater impact. So the 3 panelists today that we have the pleasure of hearing from have remarkable experience and expertise in this domain. Karyn Polito served as the 72nd Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts alongside Governor Charlie Baker, and served as a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives and in municipal government before. As a lawyer, she managed her family's real estate development and commercial leasing business, where she presides as owner and operator today. Currently, Ms. Polito is an independent director on public and private corporate boards, and she enjoys mentoring students both at the HKS Rappaport Institute, the Working for Worcester student-led nonprofit, and she supports the Worcester Regional Research Bureau on Public Policy. She holds a JD from New England Law and a BS from Boston College. Next, we also have Carmen Yulín Cruz, who is the former mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Recognized as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people, Yulín was serving as mayor in San Juan when Hurricane Maria struck the US territory in September of 2017. It killed more than 1,000 people and left millions of homes without power and water. Yulín became known worldwide for her impassioned pleas for help, her critiques of FEMA's and the US government's response in general, and her powerful indictments of those who are neglecting the humanitarian crisis unfolding. Before serving as San Juan's mayor between 2013 and 2020, Yulín served in PR's House of Representatives for 4 years. She earned an MS in Public Management from Carnegie Mellon University and a BA in Political Science from Boston University. And we also have Magda Hinojosa, who is Dean of Social Sciences in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and professor in the School of Politics and Global Studies at the Arizona State University. She is the co-author of Seeing Women Strengthening Democracy, How Women in Politics Foster Connected Citizens, published in 2020, which examines how the increased descriptive representation of women as legislators affects citizens' political engagement. She is also the author of Selecting Women, Electing Women, Political Representation and Candidate Selection in Latin America, published in 2012. Her work has been funded by the Fulbright Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and USAID, among others. She holds a PhD and Master's in Government from Harvard and a BA in Government from UT Austin. So, with no further ado, I'll simply say that you can find out more about these speakers' impressive resumes on the conference webpage. And the format today will be that each of these wonderful speakers will come here and deliver some formal remarks, after which we will have a discussion amongst us on the panel. And we will, of course, reserve the last 15 minutes for audience Q&A, but you're welcome to submit questions at any time during this session, and we will get to as many as we can. Whether you're watching in person or online, you can submit questions using the Slido link provided on the screen behind me and posted in the chat of the Zoom webinar. So now I have the pleasure of inviting former Lieutenant Governor Polito to start us off by sharing her thoughts with us.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to be with you. And to those at home, welcome and thank you for sharing your time with us as well. I'm delighted to be here at the Institute and more delighted to be here with our panelists, Mayor Cruz Soto and Magda. It's great to be with you in person. And Mayor, again, we did this last year together, so it's always fun to have a reunion. And Erica, thank you for framing up our discussion. This is a great opportunity for us to not only share, but to hear from you. So start thinking of your questions and those online to be able to send them in to us as well. We'll learn a little bit more together today. So let me just start by saying thanks to Dallas. That was really outstanding. And you couldn't help but feel the emotion that you shared with us in your experience. And also, cheers to nanas and hugs. I mean, a whole lot more of that needed in this world, but it was really great for you to frame that up for us. And I think in the spirit of what you shared with us about storytelling, telling your story and sharing is just a natural, normal way for people to get to know each other. And in a time where there is so much division and separation and sort of the ability to have social media even be so impersonal, it doesn't allow for that in person. So I love being in person and being with all of you. And no one more than Rochelle Walensky, who you'll hear from later, who was one of Charlie Baker and my advisors during COVID when we were so separated and isolated that to have these moments when we're together again, we can't just take these moments for granted. We need to celebrate them. So I want to talk about some of the stories that have helped me think about the how to make your voice heard. And that's not just for people seeking elected or appointed office, but this just every day. This is something for people to practice and think about in your interactions as you become more involved and aware as an individual. And it's your responsibility, I feel, to embrace the how, to have your voice heard. So there's a few things I just wanted to share. I always like to say like 3 things, because it might be something you'll remember at the end of it. And the first I'm going to talk about is just to be informed. And the story I want to talk about is in 2010, when Charlie Baker and I were running for statewide office here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as Republicans in this deep blue state. I was running for state treasurer, and the governor at the time was running for governor as a candidate. So we're on the campaign trail, and we come across each other checking in at, the Dunkin' Donuts after a parade or whatever, and how are things going. But fast forward, at the end of the election, we both lost. And after, hard work and effort and thinking we were doing everything right, we lost. And so we got together and said, what happened? And what do you think we could have done better or different? And what we concluded is that we were spending too much time with people that we knew, that we were comfortable with, over and over and over again. And so we didn't really hear the voices from people that we needed to understand better, learn from, and be familiar with to help us become more informed, more engaged, more relevant, and to develop a voice that people wanted to listen to. And so fast forward 2014, we took some lessons from the loss and incorporated that into our campaign. And boy, did we have a great time, because we got out into places and into communities, into people's homes, and really touched and felt the emotion in their hearts about their hopes, their dreams, their concerns, what they were frightened about, and what they wanted in their lives. And we took that with us. And then we got over the hump, barely, and we got elected. And it didn't matter, because once you're elected, your responsibility is to represent all of the people. The politics, the labels, all those political things go away. And so we had the opportunity to be able to serve, and it was a wonderful journey, and we could talk more about that. But the point is, to be informed helped us to say something relevant and important that people wanted to listen to, so we had more listeners to our voice. And that key piece is becoming a trusted voice. To be informed is to develop a trusted voice. So that would be the first point I'd like to make. The second is to be collaborative. Now, as a Republican in a Democrat-controlled legislature, Democrat-controlled political system, you have to think collaboratively. But it shouldn't just take the minority person to be thinking collaboratively. It takes 2. And I learned this lesson when I was in the House of Representatives as a minority member in the state legislature and wanted to get stuff done. That's why you're elected, to try to move things forward. And I got connected to an issue about making it's safer for kids from dangerous repeat sex offenders. And I realized that Massachusetts was one of the only states that didn't have one of these more established systems around that. So I got my facts together and I filed a bill. Okay, so filing the bill is the very, very beginning of this process. And it represented my thinking about how to solve this problem. And so what I needed to do was to develop a consensus around this idea, and to reach out across party lines, and to find co-sponsors, and to listen to the voices that weren't in favor of how I crafted this bill, and to then develop stakeholders externally to advocate with me. And I didn't prevail on the first try or the second try, but ultimately, we passed a bill in Massachusetts, and it wasn't the Polito bill. It was a bill that contained a lot of ideas and thinking from different points of view that ultimately gained enough consensus in the legislature and the executive branch for the governor to be able to sign and to pass into law. And so that's how the sausage is made, not by one voice, but a collection of voices that can ultimately make something better. And then at the end, what's beautiful about it is you stand together with one voice and you get something done that's meaningful. And that's the same kind of lesson that I brought into office as Lieutenant Governor with Charlie Baker. And the very first act that we had to do was to make sure that we were surrounding ourselves with the different voices to help educate our decisions as executives of this Commonwealth. So we did something that might not be true for a lot of administrations. We selected a cabinet of secretaries, people with individual expertise. We didn't care their political background. We just wanted their voice to be present in our cabinet to inform and educate us and have the debates across the table so that we could better be informed and develop policies and solutions and budgets that reflected a diverse set of points. So that was my second point. The third point I want to say as a candidate or as a person is be yourself. And that is something that is hard to do. And I think it's because it involves a vulnerability in revealing who you are, emotionally, what you care about, and what moves you every day. And so I learned that lesson early on when I ran for my first seat in the state legislature. I ran for state senate before I became a state representative, and I lost that. And it hurt. But I learned so much about myself. And I realized one of the reasons why I didn't make it through is because I lacked the confidence. And I didn't have a comfort level in my skin with who I was and what I was saying and how I was saying it, to be able to convince more people to trust my voice as their state senator. And so I learned that lesson early on. You have to be true to yourself and be able to try to define yourself as who you want to be known for. And so I'm going to leave you with this image, and it's a compass. And I think about this a lot, and I love this, right? Because you have a circle here. And this picture or your compass or your circle is your navigator along your journey. And this compass will need to be recalibrated and repositioned, but put in the circle the things that you want you to be defined as or for, and not allow others to define or label or put you in a place that you don't belong. And that compass will be your navigator along your journey. And think about it every day, how that compass will set you right and set you on your course to make sure that your voice is heard, because your voice matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we are lucky to hear from former Mayor Yulín Cruz.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? Come on. I'll do it again. Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Hey.
It's very difficult to compete with intelligent women. Well, first of all, thank you to the Radcliffe Institute, and thank you to WAP. I see a lot of the folks that make possible the Oval, from Harvard Square to the Oval Office program, where we actually make sure that women run for office, want to run for office or want to run other women's campaigns. It's a wonderful organization that I've been privileged enough to be in tune with for the past 3 years of my life. But I want to talk to you about something. I'm a recovering politician. So I should have started with, hello, my name is Yulín Cruz, and I'm a recovering politician. But I can guarantee you one thing. You and I all have one thing in common. It doesn't matter if you have not held office. It doesn't matter what you do. Somehow, somewhere, we will all face a crisis. Somehow, somewhere, we have all faced a crisis. And I know that we think crises are the only ones that we see at the 6 o'clock news. But, you know, a divorce is a crisis. A person in your family who has a severe illness is a crisis. We have financial crisis. So we have everything in our midst that makes us all equal. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, who you love, who you are. It does not matter. I can guarantee that you have either faced one or you will face one pretty soon. Now, a crisis will test who you are to your core. It's like putting a mirror to your face, and you will get an opportunity to see what you're made of. In Spanish, we say, dame un momento para probar de qué estoy hecho. Give me one moment to know what I'm made of, and it will change you forever. I can tell you that on September 20th, 2017, when Hurricane Maria devastated the island nation of Puerto Rico, myself and 3.5 million Puerto Ricans were one way, and the next day, automatically, we were a different kind of person. In fact, 3,000 Puerto Ricans did not open their eyes today because they died as the result of a botched effort that renounced our humanity and denied who we are, because somebody decided that our lives were expendable. And that can happen in any crisis, anywhere. It doesn't matter the political affiliation of the people that are making the decisions. I'm a crisis survivor. I'm not a crisis expert. I know what happens when crises are not handled properly. Between 2013 and 2020, look at this. There were 2 new diseases, and Rochelle is gonna smile. Zika and chikungunya, 2 new diseases that we never knew in Puerto Rico before. They're transmitted by the same Aedes aegyptus insect that transmits the dengue fever, which is similar to yellow fever. So we didn't know how to deal with them. And each one of these diseases made it possible or make it more difficult, right, to be dealing with that. We had 2 coastal storms. It looks beautiful, but it's terrible. We had political unrest, 3 governors in 1 week. We had 2 6.0 plus earthquakes. We had COVID-19, and for me, the most devastating of all, we had 2 hurricanes, Hurricane Irma on September 6, 2017, and Hurricane Maria on September 20th, 2017. What you're taking a look at is the setup of the largest shelter in Puerto Rico that was run by the municipality that I was privileged enough to serve, the municipality of San Juan. So San Juan, in its most vulnerable areas under 14 to 21 days, was filled with water. I'm a small person, but it was filled with water hip high, filled with human excrements. Every sewer pump was blocked. Every sewer motor was broken. So just imagine the health implications of what is happening. We took to the streets to help each other the best we could. It is estimated that 20 million trees were lost, 20 to 30 million trees were lost in Puerto Rico, literally changing the landscape. Look at the debris. This is what FEMA wanted us to divide between vegetative, domestic, and other type of debris. How do you divide that, right? In a crisis, when you're in office or when you're a leader anywhere you are, and you can be a leader at home, you have to be ready to answer the question, what are you prepared to do? Because there will be a price to pay. Let's not be naive. There will be a price to pay for standing up and speaking up. So I want to share with you some of the lessons that I learned in the hope that you will find them, that they resonate with you. The number 1 is stand up and speak up. And Dean, I think Dallas has turned this from the gender conference into the NANA conference. I do know that if you don't stand and speak up on a crisis, people will die. People will die because you can kill people with neglect or you can kill them with a gun. You can kill them slowly because you don't provide the appropriate health care to a trans youth, and then they commit suicide just because you were so narrow-minded that you couldn't see the humanity in that other person. And I'm privileged enough to say that we established the only trans clinic in Puerto Rico. It was called Trans Salud, which translates to trans health. It's still running, although not at the same pace that it was running before. But this is my nana, my mamita. Her name is Yulín Vega, and I say is because in my heart she is. And she gave me permission to be who I am. Right? And very, very quickly. I'm not very tall. If I take my high heels off, I'm like, 4'11" and a half. And at the time, in the 60s, you had these lunch boxes that were made out of steel with thermoses that were made out of steel and very heavy. I was getting bullied in the sandbox, and she asked me, did you start the fight? No, I did not. Did you finish the fight? No, I did not. And she said, well, if you don't finish the fight next time, I'm going to whoop your... So, I didn't want to feel that wrath. Long story short, they bullied me. I did it. They call her in. She walks into the teacher's office. She looks at me and says, did you start the fight? I said, no, but with a big smile, I said, but I finished it. She had told me before, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take the lunchbox. You're going to hit him as hard as you can. And I'm not describing violence. I'm telling you what she told me. You're going to scream as loud as you can, and you're going to run as fast as you can. So I did that. And the teacher is all appalled. I don't understand. She's such a good student. She's so peaceful. She's never done anything like this. My grandmother, who was 4'11", remember I'm 4'11" and a half, 4'11", stood up and said, that's interesting. While she was getting harassed, nobody stood up for her. Nobody spoke up. But now that she stands up and speaks, defends herself, then everyone has a complaint. Will you get your stuff? You're going for ice cream. Because you have every right to stand up for yourself. So that was lesson number one. But then when we were walking towards a car, she said, but you have a duty to stand up for others. And then the days after the hurricane, I remember that just with a passion. Lesson number two, there will always be a bully in your way. If you think this is going to be easy, it's not going to be easy. Standing up and speaking up is never easy because you're taking away what somebody else wants, what keeps them in power, what keeps their voice being heard. Let's forget for a moment what we may think about the monarchy. That woman was quietly playing. Her uncle fell in love, abdicated to the throne, and boom, she's queen. So you don't have to be born a leader. Or you don't have to be born with money, or your last name doesn't have to be one of the political powerhouses in any country. All you have to do is have a passion and understand that if you open your mouth or you do sign language or you put up a sign or you put up a decal in your car, you are speaking up for something that matters to you. And that's why what Karyn told you, it's very important. That storytelling is very important. And lesson number four, this picture was taken about 10 minutes before I was beaten by that cop. And I was a member of the House of Representatives at the time. It was a peaceful demonstration, which is why we have our hands crossed over so that everyone knows that we're not starting anything, right? But just the presence of being there starts anything. So you have to become comfortable with your role as an agitator. Somebody's going to call you a socialist or a communist or that woman or worse names that we cannot repeat from this podium. You have to be comfortable with the fact that what you want is going to irritate someone else. So in order for your voice to be heard, you have to understand your purpose. You have to own your power. You have to stop making excuses and get out and do it. And you have to embrace your role as an instigator. They would call Martin Luther King an outside instigator. Martin Luther King, Nobel Peace Prize, that communist instigator. According to Fox News, I'm in prison right now because I embezzled $3 million from the municipality of San Juan. So what Karyn was saying about, and Erica, what you were mentioning about the misinformation is important. Your role as an instigator has to be combated with falsehood, and all you have is the truth. So I want you to repeat this with me. If you want change, stand up and speak up. 1, 2, 3.
If you want change, stand up and speak up.
Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3. If you want change, you have to stand up and speak up. Otherwise, you stood up. Yeah, there you go. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So be bold, unapologetic, be like Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, unafraid and relentless in the pursuit of what you think would be a better world. And you know it's a better world when it includes people, when it provides more freedom, when it lets people be who they really are. I just, on behalf of those 3,000 Puerto Ricans that did not open their eyes today, that did not have to die, because we didn't have electricity or water for almost a year. Things like that don't have to happen. They don't need to happen, and we all need to raise our voice so they don't happen again. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, we'll hear from Professor Hinojosa.
Tough acts to follow. Good morning. My name is Magda Hinojosa, and I'm going to be talking to you about making your voice heard, women in politics. In some ways, my comments today are really going to bridge some of the things we heard earlier this morning with some of the comments by the previous presenters. So all morning, we've heard that representation matters. Spoiler alert, I'm also going to tell you that representation matters. But before I do, I want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing when we talk about representation. So I think there's 3 different types of representation that we can speak of. We can talk about descriptive representation, we can talk about substantive representation, and we can talk about the symbolic representation of women. Now, when we're talking about descriptive representation, we're asking, does the legislature represent the electorate demographically? So we're talking about the numbers of women in office. When we talk about substantive representation, we're asking ourselves, do we see women's interests represented in policy? So that's policy matters. It's things like maternity leave, for instance. Right? And when we're talking about symbolic representation, well, this is a little bit more nebulous. It's thinking about whether women feel engaged with the political process, its feelings and attitudes towards government and politics. Now, this isn't a mystery novel, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what my take-home point is going to be, and that's that women's presence is their voice, and their presence speaks volumes. Now, oftentimes, when people talk about having more women in office or the need to have more women in office, they are very much focused on substantive representation. They're talking about policy, i.e., if we elect more women, we'll get certain kinds of policies passed, certain kinds of laws on the books, and this is certainly important. But as quotas are debated across the world and other affirmative action measures are being considered in countries across the globe, there's lots of reasons to include women in politics, and not just focusing on substantive representation, I would argue, is equally important. So plenty of reasons to think about including women in politics, including the fact that if we exclude women, we're literally excluding half the talent from the globe from making a difference. In addition, we can think about the quality of democracy, and that's the thing I'm going to focus on today. This is directly from the prologue to my latest book with Mickey Kittleson. Laura Chinchilla recounts that while serving as president of Costa Rica, she would visit schools, and as we are all wont to do, would ask the children what they wanted to be when they grew up. One day, she asked one of the little boys, "Don't you want to be president when you grow up?" And the boy replied, "Well, the thing is, you have to be a woman to be president." Now, as Laura Chinchilla recounted this, the audience laughed, just like you did. But the truth is that it's hard to be what you can't see, right? And for once, this was happening to a little boy. But for all of history, this has happened to little girls, right? Seeing women matters. It matters for our littlest citizens, but I would say it also matters for all other women. Now, when it comes to things like voting, women have caught up to men. Yet other gaps continue to exist that are extremely important for the well-functioning of democracy. So for instance, here you can see some gender gaps in political interest between men and women in countries across Latin America. Latin America is the area of the world that I tend to focus in on. So we see gaps in political interest. We see gaps in political knowledge. That's not just an assessment of knowledge, because as Jennifer Lawless told us earlier today, men might be a little overly confident in their abilities. But it is actual real questions of political knowledge. Women tend to trail men. When it comes to having political discussions, women are trailing men. When it comes to a sense of political efficacy, i.e., can they make a difference in their world, women trail men. When it comes to thinking about trust in the political process and trust in government, women often are also trailing men. And we can imagine that this makes perfect sense. If politics doesn't seem to be for you, if people that look like you aren't in politics, you might start to tune out a little bit. Feelings of exclusion from the political sphere do matter. And of course, until 100 years ago in this country, and certainly many others, the vast majority of countries across the globe, women were not included. They were not allowed to be included, right? Neither could they vote, nor could they stand for office in many places. And so we can imagine that that has quite an effect on women, and that those effects don't go away magically. Now, in my book with Mickey Kittleson, we propose the visible Q theory of representation. And we talk about the fact that having more women in office sends an important signal, and that the signal is that politics is no longer strictly an arena for men, and that the presence of women such as these in politics sends a really important message, but it can only be a message that is picked up if it is in fact visible to people. Seeing women in office, we believe, spurs women's attention to politics. They become more politically engaged citizens. They start to have more political discussions because they're following the news. They become more politically knowledgeable. And they end up having more trust in government and more confidence in systems and processes that they see, including people like themselves, as they start to feel like full and equal citizens. So we say that seeing women strengthens democracy. Now, we ultimately, because we are academics, needed to study this in a particular way. And what we did to try to find out whether seeing women in politics did in fact make a difference was to study this in a particular case. And this was the case of Uruguay, because we got extraordinarily lucky in identifying a perfect environment for testing what we wanted to test. Uruguay had passed a gender quota in 2009 that would not be implemented until 2014. And this provided an enormous opportunity for us because we had enough time to actually get funding for surveys. Thank you, USAID, for that. This was also really important because the gender quota served as a prognostication tool. When you are a political scientist like I am, you're at a distinct disadvantage because you don't know what the future is going to hold. And this was a case in which we actually had a pretty good idea of what would happen. We knew that after this gender quota, which was a very well-written gender quota, we would likely see a pretty dramatic increase in women's representation. Part of this was also because Uruguay is a very rule-bound country, and we knew that people would follow the rules of the gender quota. In fact, this did take place. We were able, therefore, to carry out a panel survey. And a panel survey is important because we literally were going to survey the same people before and after. And we were able to carry out surveys over a short period of time, immediately before and after an election. And the thing is that really helped us out here, and where we got super lucky, was that there wasn't much political change in Uruguay during this time period. The person running for the presidency, who ended up winning the presidency, was campaigning on a pledge to continue the policies of his predecessor. The only big change, actually, that took place in Uruguay during this time period was that women's representation doubled in the Senate, jumping from 13% to 26% overnight. And this was important for us, too, because it's that kind of change that we thought would be visible. A slight increase would likely not be captured by the citizens in the same way. So talk about a year of the woman. Now, our research design called for a panel survey of 1,200 citizens that was going to be very strategically timed. We did a before-after analysis where we carried out the first wave ahead of the October 26, 2014 elections. This would allow us to have a sample before we saw this big change in women's descriptive representation, and then after, between December 2014 and early February 2015, we carried out the second wave. This was also important because not only had it already been announced that women's representation in the Senate had doubled, but it was also the case that Parliament had been on recess, so there were no policy changes at all during this time that could influence how people felt about government, that could influence the feelings that we were trying to assess through our survey. Now, what we ended up seeing were statistically significant changes. Women became more politically interested, they felt more politically efficacious, they were more politically knowledgeable, and they had higher rates of trust in their government and in the political process in our second wave of the survey than they had in our first. Again, same women 4 months later. Pretty much no effects on men, by the way. And so what does this tell us? It tells us that seeing more women in office mattered. Again, these women hadn't even been sworn into their posts yet, and it mattered. Again, no other changes to the political atmosphere. The same party stayed dominant, the same party won the presidency. Parliament wasn't doing anything this whole time because they were on summer recess. So, I would say that seeing women really does matter. And I have some unfortunate news, which has already been shared earlier today, again by Jennifer Lawless, who is also a very tough act to follow. In Mexico, half of Congress, half of congressional members are women. In Costa Rica, it's 47%. In Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Argentina, these are countries in Latin America that I study, over 40% of congressional seats are occupied by women. Jennifer Lawless told you that we're ranked about 70th in the world today. All of these other countries are ahead of us. The US is making progress. It is very slow progress. And I certainly am not willing to wait until 2108 for parity, right? So, that's part of the reason why I am absolutely thrilled to be here on this stage with women politicians whose presence, I think, really does send a signal, whose voice is heard loud and clear long before they open their mouths. I think they speak volumes. So thank you all so much. And thank the women who are here, who have been brave, who have run for office, who are out there representing us as women. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We have a few minutes to talk amongst ourselves and then to hear from our audience too. And we've already got a number of wonderful questions coming in. I'll try to sort of roll them into my own. I just wanted to ask each of you one question before we dive in a little bit deeper. Karyn, in your remarks, you talked about the importance of working across the aisle, and you've long been a champion of civil discourse. And of course, these are crucial skills to build both democratic capacity and culture and to engage in conflict resolution. One argument I have heard is that the effort to promote civil discourse in particular can sometimes stifle legitimate but unpopular perspectives, and that a lack of civility can be appropriate or even necessary in the face of great wrongs. A similar or maybe parallel argument is concerns the fact that we have, as one of our audience members put it, more attention to battle lines than to alliances in our current polity. So can you speak to how you might respond to both of those arguments about the purported necessity of incivility and the attention span for battle lines?
That's a very relevant question, and I'm happy to take it on and have further conversation for the rest of our time together on this particular topic. So they're not mutually exclusive. They're very related. Civil discourse, civil protest, they go hand in hand. And so there was a piece in the Boston Globe today, it's worth reading, it's a quick read, about a young man, Israeli man, in his early 20s, and maybe you saw this in the Globe, and he was in New York City, and he saw a protest, an anti-Israeli, anti-war protest, and he walked into the protest, into the crowd, and those reporting and looking, wondering what was going to happen. Was it going to be a battle line, or was it going to be something else? And what was described in the story is that there was a storytelling. There was a conversation between this young man and a woman in the protest. And they came to a conversation and came to understand each other better. And there was a story about it. That's a good place to start. The other is a kind of a visual image, but it's consistent with what the mayor was talking about. And this is a phrase that my partner, Governor Baker, often would talk about. And he'd say, when you see two people in a fight, beating up each other and spitting and shouting at each other, you're pretty sure one of them's a jerk. You just don't know which one. And you weren't the jerk. But the point is, the jerk, don't be the jerk, but the jerk is trying to silence and put down and shut up and stop the other. And that's where it's going wrong. Because what we want to encourage is the conversation and the debate and the different points of view. And it breaks my heart seeing commencement speakers not speaking, people not being able to go to the graduation, people not speaking at lecterns in a civil manner like we are today, sharing their points of view. Instead, canceling, shutting down, stopping, isn't allowing the conversation to be had. And that's not a good place to be, friends. So we have a lot of work to do. So I wanted to just bring my visual. Here we are. But the visual is a piece I came across recently that was published by the Wall Street Journal. It was an opinion piece named "Free Speech is Alive and Well at Vanderbilt University." I said, what the heck are they doing over there at Vanderbilt University? And I read the article, and it's worth reading as well. And they have, I didn't know this, but they have all students incoming to the university sign a community creed. Now, the community creed is student-driven. It's student-informed, and it describes the kinds of values that set up the barriers and the guidelines for their campus. And so they promote civil discourse, they promote protest, they promote different points of view, Republicans, Democrats, whoever, come together and share. In this article, there was a breakdown in recent time over BBD and the Gaza-Israeli war, and it elevated into a protest where there was a disruption and physical harm, and then arrests, and the rest is noted there. But the outcome is consistent with the rules and the guidelines that the university set by the students around what is acceptable. And what's not acceptable is physical harm in unsafe places and spaces for people to come and share their ideas. And so the battle line for civil discourse can't involve life and death. It has to involve respect in an open arena, and in this case, Vanderbilt sets an institutional neutrality so that they aren't weighing in and saying and creating a bias around what they think for you, but they're creating an arena where you can define how to speak and how to share and how to inform yourself and be enriched in that process. So the long and the short of it is we got a lot of work to do, but we have examples around us. If we choose to see them and study them and know them, that should become more in the forefront and not the back burner.
Thank you. Thank you. Yulín, you talked about this idea that standing up and using your voice comes at a cost. That's not unrelated to what the former Lieutenant Governor was just saying. Can you elaborate more on what future change makers might need to prepare themselves to take on those costs? In the absence of nanas who can work overtime nonstop, what types of supports and networks and resources should they be accessing to undertake the work ahead of them?
First of all, let me say that Karyn and I have often joked that we should go on a civil discourse tour. Because, most people would look at us and think they're really on extreme places when it comes to many issues. And it's important to know that in many issues, when it really counts, we're both willing to say, well, maybe it's not everything I want, but it will get the job done for everyone that I want. And that is the main goal, right, to get that done. One other thing is you have to know who you are. You have to really know, you know how they call the primal fear? You have to know your primal values. You have to know what you were brought up on and what you really believe. My father used to wake my brother and I up every year, once a year at 3 in the morning and scream, "Arriba, corazones!" Rise up hearts. And I'd be like, oh, damn it, here we go again. And you get one instruction. You have to wear one t-shirt, short sleeve t-shirt, and you have to take just water, nothing else. So they would drive us down to where they were cutting sugar cane, 6 o'clock in the morning, the whistle would blow, and the workers would stop their work, and my mother would pull out, give us a little bit of a loaf of bread, and the top of the thermos in my life have a thing, the top of the thermos, and say, take 1 or 2 sips of coffee. And then she would say, if you were down there, that is the only thing you would have. So just remember, because you're up here, doesn't mean that you can forget those that are in a different place than what you are. So it was instilled in me all the time. I was privileged enough, it was instilled in me that we are but the sum of those that we cannot see. Saying grace in my house was like, my mother would start, and we thank you, Lord, for the seeds. And I'd say, I'm hungry. And we thank you for the workers that planted the seeds, and for the truck drivers, and for the people that put the seeds in a can. And I'm like, I'm hungry already. But there was a distinct way. So you can look around. If you have not been brought up that way, you can look around and really show interest in people, really make connections. We had the governor yesterday speaking about when somebody else is having a bad day, how a phone call is important. But don't make connections just for the sake of making connections as, transactional. Really, really pay attention to what people are saying. And if you hear at this conference today somebody that you met that their kid is ill, write them a little text, a little note. You really have to care about someone else. So you have to know who you are. You have to know what your values are. And you have to know that it is okay to be scared. Do you think I wasn't scared? Of course I was. When I had that press conference where I said, we are dying here and you are killing us with your bureaucracy and your inefficiency, my legs were shaking so hard. I thank God I had a podium in front of me. In fact, I finished that press conference and I almost passed out. Fear is, I think, and the doctors in the audience could tell us more, the body's natural response to something that you're not used to. But with discipline, you can overcome that fear. And the last thing that I would say is think about the cost of not speaking up. People speak up when they have had it, when they have nothing to lose, when the cost of not speaking up is greater than the cost of speaking up. I mean, do you think I like to live with shades in my house and all secluded, and I'd have to send at some point my stepdaughter to live somewhere else because it was so dangerous? Of course not. I didn't like that. But I knew that the cost that I was serving was a higher cost. And the last thing that I would say is you have to look within you with what pulls you through your times. Mm-hmm. In my case, it's my faith. I was raised Catholic. I had a very funny relationship with God. It was very transactional. You know, the kind that you say, God, if I don't pass out while giving birth, I'll say go to a mass. Or if you help me with this toothache, I'll really just go to church and turn up a light or something. But then when you see not God as God, when you see love, when all you see is love, you don't want a trans child to be bullied. I mean, what is this BS about bathrooms? In our houses, we all go to the same bathroom, mm-hmm. Men and women and anything in between. I don't know why people get so caught up in that. So overcome your fear and understand that you're serving a higher purpose. Take care of yourself. Put your mask on first. They tell us that on the plane. And I had a conversation with Rochelle a long time ago about that. I literally never took care of myself physically or emotionally. You know, we're Latinos, we don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about emotional health in the Latino community. And if you're women, you have to be Wonder Woman, which I wish I had that lasso of truth. You know how many men that I dated, I would have only dated once rather than more than once is with that lasso. But really, know who you are, know what your values are. Know that you cannot do this alone and you're doing this in community. Have a genuine interest in other people and let love be your guide, because if you love another human being, you're only going to see the part of that human being that reflects you. It is difficult, but it can be done.
Thank you. So, Magda, for you, much of your work has focused on obstacles and pathways to women's representation in politics. Can you talk a bit more about whether women's visible presence is enough, given that progress on that measure often coincides with disturbing trends, such as Mexico's radical increase of women's presence at politics at the same time that femicide remains troublingly common? And one of our audience members similarly asks you to comment on the sort of the rise of women in prominent movements attempting to roll back women's rights.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Yeah, so absolutely. I do think substantive representation matters. At the same time, I feel very strongly that descriptive representation matters. And as you just mentioned, Erica, my research has largely focused on getting women into office, so seeing the kinds of obstacles that have been presented or the kinds of policies that have allowed women into political office, including across Latin America, the use of gender quotas in all countries at this point, with the exception of Guatemala. And that has had a radical effect on women's inclusion in the region. Now, I think that brings all sorts of voices into office. And I think it sends a message to women from all political parties, young women, old women. If we were talking about the US, we'd be talking about Republican women and Democratic women. I think that's a great message for all of those women. So I don't think that my concern as an academic, has really been focusing on what it is that gets women into office. But yes, there are plenty of folks who have looked at the other side of the equation, which is when we have women in office, do they push a particular kind of agenda, right? So, and I think it's important for us to make sure that we maintain a distinction between women's representation and, say, feminist representation, or the representation of particular policy issues, because women are not a monolithic group. We are all wonderfully, beautifully different. And that does mean that we come, and the two women here sitting next to me demonstrate this, at questions from different angles, right? And we bring different things to the table, but I want to make sure that women's voices are included, regardless of what their particular policy stance might be. I think it's important to have women at the table regardless. And I do feel that having Karyn in office, having Yulín in office, sends a message to women that politics is for us too, and that's a really important message. Now, does it mean that certain policies are more or less likely to be advanced? The academic literature seems to indicate that there is almost certainly some correlation there, that once you do get women into office, you are more likely to see certain kinds of policies that we might think of as feminist policies. Again, there's not agreement on what the word feminist would even entail in terms of policy decisions. So I think it's a challenging one for sure. But we are likely to see, and have seen in Latin America, I think, as we're seeing more women in office. My own PhD student was here just a minute ago, and I think she has just walked out. She's just finished a fantastic dissertation that is looking at the green and purple waves, which are pro-abortion, anti-domestic violence waves of protest action across Latin America that have been taking place. And it does seem like bringing more women into office has had the effect of inspiring women to certainly take to the streets and start making certain kinds of demands, which I think speaks to the topics I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Magda, as we turn to audience questions, I want to stay with you for just a little bit, because we have some great questions from the audience who are political science wonks, and they want to ask a little bit about some of the variation they noticed in the maps and in some of the general trends you were reporting. So a few people ask questions about whether things like former British colonies or highly Catholic countries that have a high Catholic population, or countries with different constitutional features, voting rules like first past the post, things like this, how does that affect the ability of women to break through in elected office in particular?
Yeah, those are great questions, and luckily there is like a very rich academic literature that has looked at these sorts of things. I would say that the biggest, most important element of all of this is the rules of the game. So what are the rules of the game? And in this case, Erica just mentioned first past the post systems as opposed to proportional representation system, I think have had a pretty significant effect. And because those first past the post systems tend to be in former British colonies, we might start to see certain kinds of patterns. It is almost certainly because of the rules of the game, not the fact that the British were themselves in these countries occupying at some point. So I would say that's the biggest thing, and what has led to radical change. So Jennifer Lawless, for instance, mentioned earlier today that the U.S. has dropped down over the last 20 years from, say, 50th to about 70th in world rankings, and anyone who's interested should go to the Interparliamentary Union. If you just type in IPU, women's representation, you can see updated rankings every single month on how countries are doing. And what you will notice if you're looking especially across time is that the biggest change has been a change to the rules of the game, and that is the adoption of gender quotas and sometimes gender reservations in many countries across the globe. So these are not rare instances. There are dozens and dozens of countries across the globe who have adopted these kinds of policies in order to ensure as much as possible that women are represented in politics.
Who's working on gender quotas in the U.S. right now?
You know, this is this is interesting because there are those who will say that gender quotas are incompatible with a first past the post system, and others have pointed out that in fact they've been tried and there are ways that this can work, including potentially twinning districts and saying to a party, in one of these two districts, you'll have to present a woman candidate, right? It's a little bit more complicated in the US because we also have such a weak party system relative to other countries. I know that's a little hard to fathom, given that all we talk about are Republicans and Democrats, and it's really hard for third-party candidates in the US, but we don't have disciplined parties like other countries often do, where it is the party who ultimately decides who their candidates will be, and who have total control over who uses their party name. Here, you'd have to sue, right, to get someone to stop calling themselves a Republican, that the Republican Party might not want affiliated with them. Same thing for the Democrats.
Yeah, thank you. Karyn, I wanted to come back to you with one of our audience questions about role modeling. So to this point that you can't be what you can't see. And the point about breaking through the cacophony of kind of negative stories with some good examples out there. What would you share with us about how to get more positive role models of women's leadership out there into the public sphere so that there's more of that to pay attention to?
Yeah, go back to the point about quotas, which might be difficult to accomplish here. You can keep track, right? So all the systems that do keep track are clearly helpful. Role models are key in everything. I'm a big believer, and we talked earlier, Erica, about participation in the electorate system. High participation in a presidential election year, like everyone pours out to go vote. In a governor or state elected election, maybe half, a little more than half show up. In municipal government elections, very low participation. And that is the government closest to you that affects your everyday life. Do the buses run on time? Do the police show up? Does fire and emergency show up? Is your public health system in order? How's the building department? Is it safe in the structures that you visit every day? Every day. And you might get in the teens participation in local government. I started my service there because I wanted to be close to my community and give back to a place that was good to me. It was a basic premise of that motivated me to run for office. But I learned there about the importance of voice and participating and being constructive. And when doing that, my first role model recognized that someone like me, being in local government, having a business background, and being in central Massachusetts, and a woman needed to go and run for a seat in the legislature because we needed more voices and representation of women in the legislature. And he was the then governor of Massachusetts, Paul Cellucci. So women helping women, yes, but it's more than women. Leaders, people in positions need to be intentional and active around seeing in people the qualities and characteristics that we need in leadership positions. And you need to ask them, you need to encourage them, and you need to support them. And that's true everywhere. Charlie Baker, one of my biggest role models and supporters in my journey in public service. I learned so much from him, and he did for me and valued my voice and my leadership in the administration, as well as others that we staffed around us. But role models come in different shapes and sizes, and you've got to find the ones that you can relate to. But you either be a role model and be intentional about that, and then obviously seek one out. I just happened to meet someone at an event the other night. Wonderful story about a medical student becoming captain in the Navy, and she's like, "What advice would you give to me?" And I said, "Oh, I think you need to find a role model that you can identify with that will help you get to your next step." And she said, "Well, do you have any thoughts?" I said, "I absolutely do." And there I go on the text, and I connected her with someone that I think is a fantastic leader, and here they are talking about whatever it is that they can work on together. So every day you can do stuff like that.
Great. So we have maybe time for just one more brief remark from each of you before we break for our lunch break. And I guess one of the audience members asks us to comment on things that surprise us the most. So maybe Yulín and Karyn, you can talk about what surprised you most being a woman elected leader. And then Magda, maybe you can talk to us about what is surprising you right now in the growing and very dynamic field that you are doing research in. So Yulín, why don't you start us off?
What surprised me the most? I think one usually attaches to that something that is negative and you're surprised that it is positive. But what surprised me the most, especially in all those crises that we had to face, is the ability of people's perceptions of power structures to shift at the community level. I often said that I would get to a community after the hurricane and say, oh, here's all these boxes of food and blah, 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 and sexist. All the men, please come here and help. And, and the men would say, talk to that lady over there. And inevitably, here goes Dallas again, it was the oldest grandmother there who had really become the power structure in that moment. Why? Because of simple things. And that taught me, one, that you can find leadership in any place and anywhere. And that surprised me, because when you're a politician, you have an ego. And any politician that says they don't have an ego, they don't even know themselves, because you have to be able to speak up and know that everyone is going to want to listen, right? So my ego at that point was telling me, wait a minute, I'm the mayor. I'm the one that should give out the orders here. No. The little old lady was giving out the orders. You know why? Because she put together the soup kitchen that was feeding the community. And when it really comes to it, at our core, we have to have our basic needs met. Food, water, electricity, education, health. And whomever supplies that for us is going to be our leader. And that's who we are going to follow. So it surprised me that in a very chauvinistic and machista culture, when push comes to shove, it is women that rise in the power structure. And everyone literally kneels and recognizes that power structure because they are able to get the job done in what is immediately needed to keep people alive. So who knows? You may be sitting next to the person that will be able to help their community organize. And leaders are only the people. I always say that people will follow you, let you lead them if you follow them. So it's backwards, right? If you follow them, people will allow you to lead them. But it surprised me a lot how the one that seemed the weakest in a time of crisis was the strongest.
Powerful. Thank you. Karyn.
It surprises and shocks and disappoints me that we haven't had a woman president of our country. I mean, when I think about women and what we do every day to balance all of the things in life between your family and your community and your work and your objectives, it's all hard. And it's probably the reason why many women don't rise up and choose a path in public life, because of the things that they think about and worry about every single day. I was fortunate to be able to not live with regret, but to take the chances and run for office, because I had rock solid, 100% incredible husband who has done everything in the day-to-day life to raise our kids and support me and make everything go so that I would have that ability to focus and do the things on my public journey. So I was blessed in that endeavor, but I worry about that a lot, and I know that women, in the way we focus on life, we get stuff done, and boy, does this country and this government need to get more done for the people of our country. So let's go.
Thank you.
Let's do it.
Okay, so what's surprising? First of all, Jennifer Lawless said by 2108 we will have gender parity in the US Congress. This surprised me because back when I started doing research, we were talking in this area, we were talking about around the year 2300. So we have made progress. Obviously, we are picking up speed. So I'm going to just go ahead and push on the glass half full element of this and say how shocking it is actually to find that we're 200 years closer than I expected we would be just 20 years ago. So still not excellent news, but getting better. And I'd like to see that certainly pick up pace soon. The other thing, and relatedly, which is, like Jennifer Lawless, I am not 38 years old. And I have been shocked by how many people are doing research in this area. When I started doing work on women in politics in Latin America, I was one of a handful of people in the US doing work in this area. And certainly the women in politics in the US field was more robust, but you couldn't find someone who was doing work on women in politics in Africa very easily. Well, there's one person really that you would go to for that, and you couldn't talk to anyone who was doing work on women in politics in the Middle East. It was unheard of. And the number of people who are now thinking about these issues every day and working really hard trying to understand what is getting women into office, what is preventing them from getting into office, what the effects are from having women in office, both for little kids like I talked about, or grown citizens and how they relate to politics, or whether it's the actual policies that are coming out of these countries as a result of women's inclusion into politics. Most cases, greater inclusion into politics. We have some places that are still certainly even worse off than the US. That's been shocking, and it's a wonderful surprise that I am not alone, especially as I've moved into different administrative work. It is wonderful to know that there are so many bright young scholars who understand how important it is to do work in this area.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for the work that you have done and are doing and will continue to do, and for the very stimulating and inspiring conversation. Thanks also to the audience for your great questions, and let's join together and thank these wonderful panelists.
Just want to echo my thanks to Erica and Magda and Yulín and Karyn. That really was fantastic. Thank you.